Right, so since my last Forspoken video that I did on the RX 6600 XT, I've decided to kit out one of my systems and see what we can actually achieve in Forspoken when it comes to frame rates. So this system is a 12700K with 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory running at 3600 megahertz CL18. So it's not the fastest memory, but it'll get the job done. And the GPU I've got is an RX 6900 XT. Alright, so we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p and 4K. And we will actually start with the 1080p low preset. So let me just show you the settings here. So we're at 1080p. We've got the frame rate limit set to 120 because it can't go any higher. And then for graphics, you'll see that can't click there. So for graphics, you'll see that we've got the custom profile, but it's actually low. I just disable FSR because with the low preset, you actually run on FSR performance. So I'm just going to change this to custom and then we can disable FSR. Right, so you might be thinking this is a 6900 XT. Surely we'll be CPU bottlenecked at 1080p, and let's just get our frame rate counter up there. And you are absolutely right. So you can see that the GPU usage is sitting at 70%, give or take. Let me just reset the numbers there. But I've come to a different area here, and you can see we are hitting that 120 frames per second lock. So I've come to a different area. The previous video I did between two canyon walls, and it was a little bit light. Well, it wasn't as demanding. So we're going to be testing in this area instead. I just want to show you one thing. So we drop down here, and as we get closer to the ground, so does our FPS. Sure, 100 frames per second is definitely playable, but to only get 100 frames per second in this title with a 6900 XT and at 1080p low, that's just mind-boggling. I mean, we're not maintaining our 120 frames per second cap there. Let me just try and get rid of these. I'm not going to be doing a long test at these settings. I just want to show you that even on the lowest settings possible without using FSR on last gen's flagship GPU, or well, pretty much it was just a 6950 XT that was about 5% faster, you still can't maintain 120 frames per second, which to me is just unacceptable. Here we are running in this forest here. It is quite demanding, I'm not going to deny that, but with this hardware and the graphics looking like this, you'd expect 200 frames per second plus. You can see that we're not even CPU bottlenecked anymore. We are utilizing our GPU 98-99%. So this is a pretty demanding game, and I think it's an unnecessarily demanding game. All right, that's it for 1080p low. Let's up the settings and be disappointed even more. Alright, so once again, I'm just going to enable the standard preset here. You'll see that FSR stays off this time, and let's just reset our numbers there. And yeah, you can see we are now getting 90 frames per second. Alright, let's just fight a little bit and see what the frame rate does. Now, I just want to point out one thing. I'm actually recording on the PC that I'm playing, so the frame rate is a little bit lower than it should be, but it's only 1 to 2 frames per second. That is also why you can see the timer in the top left-hand corner. It's because I'm using Radeon Relive. So the reason why I chose the 6900 XT is because this is a console port, and the consoles run on AMD hardware. I don't have an AMD CPU to test with, not that it's going to make any difference here because we are fully GPU bound. It's just pretty strange to me. So I just want to show you, once you actually start using more intensive spells, and remember this is at 1080p standard, we sometimes drop even below 60 frames per second. Not sure if it'll happen right now, but I've seen it drop below 60 using these settings. I really can't understand how this game can be so poorly optimized, especially seeing that 4 months ago this was one of the strongest GPUs on the market. Alright, so that's it for 1080p standard. We got a decent average there, 91 frames per second. It's just that the frame rate fluctuation is quite a lot. I mean, we're going from 110 down to 60, and if you use a variable refresh rate monitor, then it's maybe not as noticeable. The game still feels pretty good. It's just pretty strange that we are getting such low frame rates. Alright, now we'll try the high preset. Alright, we're now at 1080p high, using the preset still. FSR is still disabled. Let's just reset our numbers, and we're just going to do the same. We're going to drop from this cliff here because it's quite demanding, and the performance seems to be pretty much the same as on medium. That's what I saw with the RX 6600 XT as well. So whatever changes are made by going to high from medium doesn't seem to be that demanding on the GPU. So if you really have to choose between medium and high, just play on the high preset because it seems to perform the same. Alright, so I'm just going to use some magic here. I think now will actually be a good time to see how much the frame rate drops. And just keep an eye on it. It's 58 frames per second on 1080p high with the 6900 XT. Now, I know I'm bashing this game a lot, but I think I've got a reason to. Alright, I'm just going to leave it there for the 1080p high preset. We'll try the ultra preset. That enables ray tracing, so don't expect any miracles, especially seeing that you've got such poor performance to start off with. Ray tracing is not AMD's strongest suit, so the performance it should be a little bit more. Right, so we're on the ultra high preset, and then just if we go to custom, because that's the only way you can actually scroll down here, you'll see that ray traced shadows are enabled and ray traced ambient occlusion is enabled. I'm just going to reload my save, and let's see how it goes from there. Alright, so we're on the ultra high preset, so ray tracing is enabled, and looking out over this area here, it looks pretty good, but the real test is down here. Okay, so landing, we dropped to 60. Now, don't get me wrong, 60 frames per second is still definitely playable. Dropping into the 50s there, which is not ideal. It's just that it is mind-boggling that you can't get higher than 60 frames per second at 1080p. Once again, we are fully GPU bound. The power limit on this RX 6900 XT is 288 watts. This is the XFX Merc 319 version. It's running at stock. Sure, we can overclock it, but that defeats the purpose of all my videos. I just want to show you stock performance in games so that you can decide which hardware to buy based on which games you play. Right, that wasn't completely terrible, but remember we're at 1080p. You should definitely not use this GPU for 1080p gaming. All other games tested at 1080p are heavily CPU bound. Even Cyberpunk, anything less than 1080p Ultra on Cyberpunk is CPU bound. And that is still one of the more demanding popular titles out there today, until this came along. But I don't think that this one will be as popular. Alright, so I'm just going to leave it there for 1080p. Let's switch to 1440p and see how it goes. Right, but now at 1440p, we're on the low preset. Once again, I'm just going to switch to custom so we can disable FSR. And the game looks quite a bit better, even on low. Let's just reset our numbers here, pressing too many buttons here. And we are getting 100 frames per second here, about 90. So maybe more or less the same as what we had at 1080p. Now that would normally indicate a CPU bottleneck, because if you increase your graphic settings and you don't really lose performance, that's one way to determine whether you're GPU bound or CPU bound. In this case, okay, well, we are dropping into the 80s here, so it's definitely a little bit lower than at 1080p, but you can see that the GPU usage there in the top left hand corner is pegged at 98 to 99%, so definitely not CPU bound. I think we've run out of enemies, so I'm just going to reload my save. Right, we're at standard, not medium. As I said earlier, the naming just differs, but it's essentially the same. Just select the standard there. You'll see that FSR Quality becomes enabled, so we'll just disable that. And we'll reset our numbers, and off we go. And we're maintaining 60 frames per second so far. So, and there we go, down below 60 frames per second. So when we throw our ring of fire here, we are dropping into the 40s. So if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm pretty disappointed in this game's performance, especially considering what the graphics actually look like. There are much better looking games out there that perform quite a lot better. Alright, this was at 1440p standard, so let's see what the high preset does. Right, we're on the high preset. Once again, just going to disable FSR, and that's pretty much it. I'm just going to reset the numbers there. And now we are getting about 70 frames per second. Now, one thing that this game definitely did right was the implementation of direct storage. Apparently there is some hit on GPU performance. I'm not too sure about that. I've read some reports on that. Not sure how true that is, but loading times are really non-existent in this game, which is pretty good. Stuttering is very minimal. So there are at least a few things that they did right, and as I say that, there's a big stutter there. Right, we're now on the ultra high preset, and remember, just going to custom there. What this does is it disables any upscaling, and we've got ray traced ambient occlusion, and where's the other one? Ray trace shadows. Right, so we got those enabled now. Let's just reset our numbers here. And now we're not seeing 60 frames per second. Now ray tracing is quite demanding. There are very few games that will actually run at 60 frames per second at 1440p when ray tracing is enabled. So that's not really the main concern here. It's just that the performance without ray tracing is really questionable. But let's go down to the water here and find some crocodiles or alligators. Let's just cast our ring here. With ray tracing, we're still getting about 40 frames per second. That's the minimum I saw. So pretty much the same as without. There we go, 30s. I'm just going to kill these crocodiles or alligators, and then we'll move on to 4K. Right, we're now at 4K. We've got the low preset selected. Once again, just going to disable FSR. Right, let's get our frame rate counter here. Now, looking at this, you'd think this is a pretty nice experience. You'd be happy with 60 frames per second at 4K, right? So let's just go down there. I know I'm bashing this game quite a lot, but I really don't think that anybody on PC should fork out any money for this type of game. It just sends the wrong message. It's just that it doesn't matter what game companies release, people will buy it, and they don't need to optimize it. They'll just rely on FSR or any other upscaling tech, even variable rate shading, even though in this game it doesn't really make that big a difference. FSR does, but not VRS. Alright, that's it for our 4K low. Let's try the standard preset. Alright, so we got the standard preset. Once again, it enables FSR, and this actually scales with your resolution, it seems, because at 1440p, if we selected the standard, I think this was set to quality. So let's just go into custom and disable that. Once again, we've run out of enemies, so let's just go look for some. I think here we are. Yeah, so I'll just cast my mostest demanding spell, and we seem to be getting about 30 frames per second. It's sort of 29 there, and I'm fighting a cart and losing. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't accept 30 frames per second for PC gaming, especially considering the hardware that we've got. But it is what it is, so there you have it. This was the standard preset. Now let's see the high presets. Right, so we're on high, just disabling FSR. Okay, so now this time we saw a slight regression in performance going from medium to high or standard to high, whereas at 1080p and 1440p it wasn't that noticeable actually. I'm just going to go down here and fight the crocs again. I wouldn't be surprised if we drop down to 25 around, maybe even lower, or maybe I'm just too harsh on this game. I saw 24 there, so a very good cinematic experience. Now, there are some people that wouldn't mind playing at 30 frames per second. I'm just not one of them. But if your hardware is only capable of 30 frames per second, then, I mean, that's no diss to you. It is what it is. It's just that with this high-end hardware, you'd expect a little bit better performance. All right, let's try the ultra-high preset, which enables ray tracing. All right, so we're on ultra-high. Just disabling FSR, and we got a nice 29 frames per second here. Now my monitor is a variable refresh rate monitor, and its range is actually 48 to 144 hertz within FreeSync. So at this point in time, being below that threshold, you don't get the benefits of a variable refresh rate monitor anymore. Now, I'm not, this is not unexpected, getting below 30 frames per second at 4K with ray tracing enabled, no upscaling. That's not unheard of. Most titles would struggle with these kinds of settings, especially since Radeon's ray tracing performance is not yet on par with NVIDIA. Right, now that we've gone through all the presets with all the resolutions, let's see what we need to do to get the most out of this game performance-wise. Alright, so we're back at 1080p. We are still on the ultra high preset. So all I'm going to do here is once again just going to custom, and this time I'm going to enable FSR. Let's just put it on quality. You can play around with the sharpness a bit if the image feels too soft for you. You can definitely see some shimmering in the foliage, and in my previous video I also showed the cape. There's quite a bit of shimmering and ghosting in that as well, and the effects now just look a lot more pixelated. Let's see if we can actually see it in here. So it doesn't look terrible, but it's definitely noticeable. You can definitely see that we are running at lower than 1080p. But if you want to get the best experience with ray tracing at 1080p, then unfortunately you'll have to use FSR, and this is pretty much the performance you can expect. I wouldn't mind playing like this. It's definitely not terrible. I'm not going to continue bashing the performance here. What I'm just going to say is that obviously you'd expect a little bit better from an RX 6900 XT, but these are the settings that you can use to get a relatively high frame rate and pretty good visuals with ray tracing. Alright, let's see what we need to do at 1440p to maintain 60 frames per second. Right, we're at 1440p on the ultra high preset, and I think we'll just go with, I can't click there, I keep on making that mistake. I think we'll just go with FSR Quality once again, and at 1440p, let's just reset our numbers there. I wouldn't mind using FSR Quality because it means that the game is now rendered at 1080p, so we should be getting more or less the same frame rate as what we had at 1080p with ray tracing enabled. This doesn't play terrible, and it also doesn't look terrible, relatively speaking. So you'll still notice drops below 60 frames per second, even with FSR enabled, unfortunately. But you can play around, change some settings if you want to enable ray tracing with a Radeon card. I would at this point just disable ray tracing and disable FSR and get a much better experience at 1440p native. Alright, but this is what you can expect with the Ultra preset with FSR enabled. Now let's see what we need to do at 4K. Alright, we're at 4K now, Ultra high preset, and let's see what FSR setting we need to use to get a playable 60 frames per second. That's balanced, still not 60. Performance is still not 60. Ultra performance, for the first time it goes above 60 there. Now ultra performance, I'm not 100% sure, but I think this renders at 720p, maybe 900p. Somewhere around there. Let's just reset our numbers. I found some enemies. I actually reloaded my save. Now we are still dropping below 60 frames per second. As I said, you can definitely lower the quality settings. You can go down to high or standard if you still want to use ray tracing and get an above 60 frames per second experience. Personally, I think it would just be worth it not to enable ray tracing and get a much better frame rate, and it also negates the need for FSR somewhat. We did see that on certain presets or quality settings you still definitely need FSR if you want to maintain 60 frames per second, but at least when ray tracing is disabled, it makes it a little bit easier to achieve. I'm just going to cast my main spell here again, if I can get the right button, and there we go. You can see here that you can see that this debris just looks a little bit weird, and that's because we've got ultra performance FSR enabled, obviously. So the internal resolution is much lower, and FSR can only do so much with the image quality. Sure, it does a lot for the performance. Now, one thing that you will notice is that even though we are internally rendering at 900p, our GPU usage is sitting at 100%, or well, 99% pretty much most of the time. So still not CPU bound, even with the FSR ultra performance enabled. I'll say it again, for the amount of effects that happen on screen, the absence of major stutters is definitely commendable. You'd expect there to be a lot more stutters. I think it's a direct result of a direct storage. I can be wrong. Maybe this game is not as badly optimized as I make it out to be. That was sarcasm, by the way. Alright, so there we have it. We've tested all our resolutions at all our presets, including FSR. And if you've got an RX 6900 XT, now at least you know what kind of performance you can expect. Alright, I'm going to leave it there for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And as always, we hope to see you in the next one.